He asked for your help. He asked for your arrival.
When you think of the phrase Lovecraftian, a few things may spring to mind. For me, Lovecraftian describes a slow, atmospheric descent into madness, occasionally punctuated with indescribable tentacle-based horrors. Now, for those of you seeking a similar vibe from your Lovecraftian-themed games, Forgive Me Father may come as somewhat of a surprise. See, this is a game less concerned with generating a sense of slow, creeping dread. Instead, what you get with Forgive Me Father is a pulpy, comic book-style roller coaster ride that straps you in and slams on the accelerator from practically the word go. Oh, you thought I was being hyperbolic? Well, maybe ever so slightly. Sure, you could comb through this opening room, sniff through all of the story fragments, maybe try and immerse yourself in the narrative that may potentially unfold throughout the course of this, but to be honest, your best shot is just to pick up the revolver, open that door, and get blasted, because guess what? You're gonna be doing a heck of a lot of it! It is genuinely hilarious to me how quickly Forgive Me Father goes from setup to bloodbath. In fact, almost the entirety of this opening level seems dedicated to the concepts of headshots and explosive barrels. That is, of course, until the very same level introduces you to the goddamn double-barrel shotgun. Of course, this all culminates in a room full of enemies spawning in, where you can truly take the big boomstick for a spin, the heavy metal kicks in, and honestly at this point I'm just some kind of giddy, giggling mess, because this is ridiculous. Oh, and by the way, you save via the medium of a ship-faced sailor. Sure, there's a shrine next to him, but he's the one you interact with. After that, the rest of the level feels mostly like a rinse and repeat. Once more with feeling kind of deal. More zombies, more explosive barrels, the acquisition of a lamp to help light your way through darkened areas, and finally, one last good old-fashioned bloodbath to put a bow on the level and send you out the door with a grin on your face.
More otherworldly demons.
To its credit, the start of the second level does give you a little bit of a breather to poke around a few more little story scraps and introduce you to a new enemy before thrusting you back into the action, but really, it continues as it means to go on.
Another devilish trick.
It's probably worth mentioning at this point that Forgive Me Father also features more than one playable character. For the duration of my main playthrough, I chose the priest. The other available character, of course, is the journalist. In terms of how the story unfolds, depending on who you choose, I can only say with any authority how the priest's story ends, but of what I've played of the journalist side of things, it seems to be largely more of the same, just with the character swapped out. Of course, you'll have your character comment on the various goings-on within this world in their own inimitable and wonkily translated voice acting.
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
And you'll also have access to that particular character's unique loadout of skills. These come in the forms of various relics you'll acquire during the course of your playthrough, the first of which for the priest is of course the cross. This is charged using madness, which accrues from getting into combat, and then fuels a limited amount of uses of whichever relic you desire. The cross in particular will restore health, but somewhat curiously, if you choose the journalist, your opening relic will be a fat blunt that you can smoke in order to manifest a sword, and then hit enemies in the face to steal health back. Apparently this also reduces incoming damage for the duration, and pretty much lines up with what the game outright states in terms of differences between characters. The priest favoring more slightly defensive play, whereas the journalist more aggressive and fast-paced play. Regardless of which character you choose, you will also have access to the skill tree. This covers weapons, which are shared between both characters, their respective relics, and various other bits and bobs. Each upgrade costs a point. Points are acquired through leveling up, and leveling up is done through killing enemies, so it's not really something you have to think too hard about, besides of course what exactly you want to spend those points on. And oh boy, these upgrades are not half measures, that's for sure. For example, one upgrade to the shotgun will provide it with not just an additional barrel, but tentacles. Why? How? Doesn't matter, it's Lovecraftian, I don't have to explain shit. The point is, it does extra damage now, and it's mildly uncomfortable to look at. But honestly, if I had to pick the poster boy for just how extreme the upgrades can get from one level to the next, the humble Tommy gun here goes from a standard bullet spitter into an honest-to-God energy weapon. If there's a sour point or two with regards to the skill tree, however, it would be that there's a little bit of padding in here that just strictly isn't necessary. For example, there's a lantern or flashlight upgrade tree here. I never ever needed to do that at all, and by the time you reach mid to late game, the amount of XP required to bump up a level is just dreadfully slow. And the heck of it is that this seems to be in place to justify the existence of an XP increase perk that you'll honestly need to invest in quite early if you want to reap the benefits. Oh, and word of warning when it comes to upgrading, make sure you're ultra double sure about what path you wish to pursue, because if you click a little early and regret your decision, you'll essentially lock yourself out of the other side of the upgrade tree, and no one, I repeat, no one needs to miss out on an explosive launcher that has RGB lights. Honestly, it's the kind of thing that I imagine would benefit from A, a little bit more streamlining, and B, the option to reset and reinvest your points without necessarily having to start a fresh playthrough. In terms of the overall campaign, Forgive Me Father has a reasonably sized one, consisting of 5 acts total, each consisting of a rough count of 6 maps and a boss fight. Refreshingly, each act does have its own little particular thing going on, the first one consisting of you fighting through those besieged town streets towards where else? A mental asylum. Of course! Whereas the second one takes things out a little further into the sticks, having you fight through spooky graveyards, caves and swamps on the way to an ominous castle on the hill. Act 3 takes a turn for the cultish with a really cool sequence where the level just consists of an entire horde of enemies bearing down on you. Every time you turn, there seems to be more of them, and eventually, if you haven't already, you get the message, and all you really gotta do is just friggin' book it. The back half of this one is more concerned with very unhygienically placed slaughterhouses, factories, dingy labs, and tremendously unethical experimentation before eventually taking you on a little bit of an undersea journey towards the end. But to say more than that would probably give away too much, but at the very least you can assume that things get progressively more eldritch as you progress through these successive acts. Personally speaking, however, I feel like Forgive Me Father could have easily gotten away with chopping an entire act's worth of levels out of the runtime here, because, yeah, it does get a little long in the tooth, and towards the back end, I can't help but feel that some of the levels really begin to lose focus. Overall, I wouldn't say that the level-to-level design of Forgive Me Father is anything particularly bad, nor would I say that it's all that particularly inspiring either, with a lot of levels falling into that old structural trope of collect 3 keys and maybe flip a handful of switches to proceed. At the very least, it does have the presence of mind to make things visually distinctive, level to level. The art style and the frequent flourishes of arcane architecture certainly helping. Not to mention a sprinkling of hazards every now and again, including things such as saw blade traps, conveyor belts, and more than a few traps scattered about that have a distinct Indiana Jones-style tinge to them. But in all honesty, these moments are too far and few between. And if I'm going to be particularly critical, oh boy does that last act get particularly annoying with some tremendously frustrating sections of level. For one, you've got sections with death drops on either side that are really difficult to avoid when you're trying to focus on fighting an enemy in the distance or in the air, and man, just some real poorly judged instances of platforming. It's fortunate then that when it comes to the end of each act here, even if you're getting a little tired of the overall journey, the boss fights themselves are actually pretty good, each of them offering up something a little different between them, be it the kinds of attacks you'll need to evade, things that you'll need to shoot in order to damage it, or the environment that you'll need to navigate in order to contend with it. But yeah, when it comes to highlights, the boss fights are certainly a bright spot in Forgive Me Father. So too is its core gameplay loop, because for all my gripes when it comes to the length of the campaign, the design of certain levels, the core meat and potatoes experience, that of shooting things in the face with a weapon, is pretty damn entertaining. More often than not, the weapons here are big and beefy boys. Doubly so when you get a bit of upgrading done. And if anything, the main thing that was driving me throughout most of this is just seeing how weird my weapons could get. Granted, the result wasn't always perfect. On the upper scale of things, turning my shotgun into this abyssal sea creature version of itself was pretty damn good, but the Thunderonomicon, that had potential. That you could fuse with the energy catalyst and create the Thunderonomicon Mark II, but the end result of shooting the thing was just ever so slightly... It's fortunate then that this strange and eclectic mix of weaponry has real good interplay with whatever relics your character has to hand. As mentioned before, the priest does have access to the cross, which can help you heal up a smidge. You've also got access to something that sprinkles holy water at your enemies, freezing them in place and granting you a little bit of time to either wail on them or go find a good spot to recover. And then you've got the real juicy relics, the one that turns you invincible for a certain length of time, and finally, the one that straight up just gives you infinite ammo. I think it's hard to understate how important that last one actually turns out to be, especially later on in the game where the ammo supply gets ever so slightly stingy. But overall, finding the right moments to trigger these and take advantage of them in the heat of combat is certainly one of the elements that makes these fights feel engaging even late into the game. If there's one thing, however, that I really enjoy yet I'm still kind of confused by, it would be madness. So madness is the little purple gauge on the right hand side of the HUD, and the more that fills, the more powerful you get. It also desaturates the color, save for any splotches of blood caking the area, which is very edgy and also very cool. It also feeds into your relics, providing charges of it for you to later use in combat, but how exactly these two things interact is ever so slightly opaque to me. Sometimes I've used a cross charge and I should have enough juice in my madness meter to fill another, but it doesn't always happen. Best I can figure is there's maybe another cooldown timer in the mix here somewhere that prevents relics from acquiring another usage charge too soon, but yeah, either way, it's not specifically a deal breaker, it's just something that occasionally provides needless distraction in the heat of battle. But what indeed would battle be without worthy enemies to fight against? When it comes to Forgive Me Father, there certainly is quite the ghoulish gallery of gangrenous goons. Hope you're impressed with that one, that took me a while to figure out. If anything, the enemy roster of Forgive Me Father is probably one of the aspects of the game where it's actually reasonably well paced out during the course of its 5 acts. It doesn't throw everything at you at once, it does steadily dole out these enemy types over the entire runtime, and that does help keep things trucking along, it does help keep combat feeling fresh. But overall, the name of the game here is keeping the player on the move, and the enemy types certainly help facilitate that. Of the most common, you'll certainly see a lot of wretches, which are your standard zombie-type enemies, and of the more common range types, you'll certainly see a lot of liquidators. These come in a few different flavors during the course of the campaign, but are always defined by that vat of liquid on their back, which you can crucially shoot, robbing them of their ability to shoot back, and also turning them into an easily dispatchable gloopy mess. Beyond that, you've got gobblers, which will naturally try and chase you down and inflict damage. The Child of... Let me look at my notes here. Child of Golak. That's a tricky one. These seem to be small, headless, explosive pervert people that will whip you up close and then explode when you kill them, which entertainingly can set off a chain reaction. And as for supplementary projectile types, you've got fishermen that'll chuck what else but explosive fish, culminating in what feels like some kind of Pokemon evolution in the Crabman, who can actively move in your direction, is tanky as all heck, and throws even more explosive fish material, if I'm not mistaken. And you've also got the yellow cultists. In function, these kind of remind me of the Vors from Quake. The projectiles aren't quite as dangerous, and they can teleport around the place to make it a little trickier to pin them down, but crucially, that projectile is slow moving, but corners like a shopping trolley. And what I mean by that is you're going to have to skim quite close to any columns or walls if you want that thing to collide and stop chasing you down. If anything, I could honestly go on for another solid 10 minutes about enemy types because there's just more than enough variety. You've got ambush types that lurk in bodies of water, you've got bigger, almost mini-boss-esque versions of smaller enemies you'll have previously encountered, and of course, more aggressive and speedier projectile-based enemies to just ramp up that challenge later on down the line and just keep you engaged. And that is the crucial word here, engaged. For any of the gripes that I've had about Forgive Me Father, one thing I can happily say is that I was never bored. The game honestly moves at far too swift a pace for that to ever become an element, and on top of that, it does enough to make sure you don't become complacent in terms of gameplay. Sure, you might upgrade a gun and suddenly become freaking unstoppable, but it does balance that kind of stuff up as you progress. Lets you have a little fun to begin with, but enemies do become beefier, ammo does become a little bit more scarce, and I'd say the overall challenge of the game does maintain a pretty even curve as it escalates up towards the end. So yeah, it's kind of tricky really for me to sum up Forgive Me Father without feeling like I'm damning it with faint praise. It does enough. It doesn't go above and beyond, but honestly it doesn't really need to. I mean, sure, there's a little pang of disappointment that the overall story of Forgive Me Father largely becomes a conveyor belt of just Lovecraftian window dressing, but at the same time I just can't fault the enthusiasm, the shameless glee which comes from just turning all of this into an aggressive, heavy metal-backed, blood and guts shooter. But yeah, if you're in the mood for that kind of thing, it's a pretty reasonable choice. There's a lot to play through, more than one character, and alternate skills certainly prompts more than one playthrough, and beyond that, there's even an endless mode, which gives you wave upon wave of Lovecraftian monstrosities to jib all over the place, so yeah, it's alright.